we're going to talk feet and the deadlift today, how the two can relate to one another, and essentially how the concepts of the kinetic chain or the kinetic pond can start with the feet and even lead all the way up into the shoulders. So first off, the kinetic chain concept is essentially the idea that one joint will then subsequently influence the joints above or below it, depending upon if it's out of position or stable. So in this case, the feet can then influence the ankles, which will influence the knees and the hips. Now, before we get into the actual feet themselves, we want to kind of discuss some of the anatomy and the background there, because in anatomy, what we know is that structure of any sort of organ or joint will then determine its function. So essentially, the design of something will influence the way that it can actually interact with its environment. So with the feet, what we know is that we have the complex within the ankle, all the bones. We have the tarsals, the metatarsals, and then the phalanges. But then we have this plantar fascia that spans the length of the foot. And the plantar fascia is essentially almost like a webbing on the bottom of the foot. You can think of fascia as kind of shrink wrap that surrounds the muscle and kind of almost ties everything together. So with this, the plantar fascia runs kind of from the base of your heel, or your calcaneus, over the heads of the tarsals, or excuse me, the metatarsals, and into the phalanges. So with this, over time, if it for some reason gets stretched out, if you have a problem with stability within the arch of the foot and the arch constantly collapses, you get something known as plantar fasciitis. That's what a lot of runners get. But the same can happen in deadlifting or squatting or single leg exercises. If we don't have a stable foot and that arch is constantly collapsing in, well, you may not get plantar fasciitis, but perhaps you have an issue which starts in the knee, or perhaps some pain that's in the hip. That may actually not be anything within the hip pathologically, in that there's no sort of muscular dysfunction. You may just not have a stable platform to push from, and as such, that's causing deviations within the kinetic chain. So what I mean is, whenever we have someone who is either squatting or is deadlifting, the first point of contact that we have is our feet. That's essentially what we drive into the floor with, and it's going to determine the positioning of other joints above them. So what you're really looking for here with the feet is you want to assess, can I maintain a stable arch whenever I am pushing off or whenever I am trying to descend into a flexion position. So for some people, what they're constantly going to find is when they squat, for some reason, they can't seem to push their knees out, and their knees are constantly coming in, doing one of these numbers. Now, a lot of coaches will cue knees out, knees out, knees out. They'll put a band around their knees when they squat, but if for some reason, whenever they're going to push, they're losing the arch in the foot, and it's automatically collapsing as soon as they put weight through it, especially any weight over their body weight. It doesn't matter how much you cue the external rotators at the hip, it's not going to correct the problem within the ankle. So one of the mechanisms that you can use to help fix this is known as the windlass effect. So what that means is the windlass effect is really any sort of rope or twine that is pulled on and stretched and pulled taut is the definition of the word. So within the plantar fascia, because we know it starts at the heel and runs all the way over the metatarsals into the phalanges, if we pick up the toes, what that's going to do is it's actually going to stretch the plantar fascia over those metatarsals and draw it taut. From here, what you're going to want to try to do is actually spread the toes and lay them down as wide as you can get them, and then push that big toe into the floor and make sure it stays in contact with the floor the whole time. So when you would set up for a squat or a deadlift, one of the things that I mentally try and think about is picking up my toes in my shoes, spreading them out, and then pushing that big toe into the floor nice and firmly. So really what you're trying to do here is you're trying to reestablish a stable arch, but also teach yourself kinesthetically what a tripod foot feels like. So whenever we're pushing into the floor to squat or to deadlift, we want to maintain this tripod foot, meaning base of the first metatarsal, base of the fifth metatarsal, essentially just below your big toe and your pinky toe, and the heel. That's our tripod there. That's what we want to maintain, but also make sure that the arch stays nice and stable. So, thinking back to our kinetic change concept, anytime we default and we lose that arch, we then internally rotate here, tibia, fibula first, knee dives inward, the femur follows, it internally rotates. Now if we're trying to go into flexion, we're going to get impingement at the hip. You make a torsion issue to the pelvis where one side tilts forward or the other, and that can just feed all the way up through the spine and into the shoulders. So one of those things that you want to mentally kind of run through your checklist is when you walk up to the bar, just go through in your mind, try and feel those big toes, and you can even lift your toes up in your shoes if you're wearing minimalist shoes or even Vibrams. You can definitely do this, and you can even see it occurring, is then lift those toes up, spread them out as wide as you can, and push those big toes into the floor. That's a real simple way to ensure that you keep that arch nice and stable, and then you also have that tripod foot to push from through the entire duration of the exercise. Now, one last little thing, and if you can't, for some reason, pick the toes up or you can't figure out how to spread them out, then your next step is to essentially almost imagine that you're trying to grip the floor or squeeze the floor with your toes. And what you'll see here is instead of actually trying to externally rotate at the hip to give me that arch within my foot, what I'm trying to do here is actually grip and activate all the intrinsic muscles, the stabilizer muscles of my feet. So if you combine all three of those together, pick it up first, spread all the toes on the floor, and then grip, what you'll see, if I do it again from the front, is that that will actually activate a lot of the musculature and give me that neutral knee and hip position, knees tracking over the second toe, and I haven't had to cue anything at the hips. So make sure that you assess the feet first, and that's probably going to help clean up a lot with the knees and the hips. Give it a shot the next time you deadlift, and let me know what you think.